And there you are.
That's cool.
Man, that's really good.
I'm a cartoon now.
I've never done anything like this, so hopefully you guys think this is as cool as I do. Hands up if you're ready to start.
Don't worry, Gracie. The curtain only goes up when we all have a part to play. I believe in you, Terrence.
2 minutes till showtime.
It's good that we can do drama, just in a different way.
The Virginia Air and Space Science Center is open with brand new interactive exhibits and state-of-the-art exhibit technology. Discover a world of hands-on exploration that's fun for the whole family in our new Space Explorer Gallery. Full of state-of-the-art gaming and interactive simulation, your family will have a blast exploring outer space. Enjoy an experience that's truly larger than life in our updated IMAX theater. The Virginia Air and Space Science Center, your gateway to family fun.
Pero ahí van tus tamales.
I love you more.
When Mars 2020 Perseverance reaches Mars, it will be the 9th spacecraft NASA has landed on the Red Planet in 40 years. It is incredibly difficult to land a spacecraft on another planet, and NASA wants to send humans to Mars one day in the not-too-distant future. So I've asked entry, descent, and landing expert Michelle Monk just what it is that makes landing on Mars so difficult, how we're able to do it, and what technologies we'll need in the future to put humans on Mars.
When we think about landing humans on Mars, we're going to have to land the equivalent of a 2-story house. When we reach the Mars atmosphere, we're traveling about 13,000 miles an hour. And so to slow down all that mass, we're going to need a large heat shield. Right now, we use heat shields that can fit inside our launch vehicle shroud, but we need something much bigger. We're using the concept of a hypersonic inflatable aerodynamic decelerator, or HIAD, an inflatable heat shield that is folded up inside the launch vehicle and then expands to encapsulate our vehicle and provide the area and the thermal protection we need against the excessive heat of entry. We're actually testing the HIAD next year at the 6-meter scale. That's the biggest heat shield that's ever entered an atmosphere.
So we use a heat shield to protect the payload from high temperatures, but what do we use to slow the whole payload down? The answer, rockets.
After we get through that high heating portion of the trajectory, we're still going about 2,000 miles an hour and need to slow down more. Parachutes just aren't effective. They'd have to be as big as a stadium. We have rockets with us to land softly on the surface, and we're just going to turn those rockets on a lot sooner than usual at supersonic speeds. This has never been done at Mars. It's a very difficult condition to replicate and test at Earth, and so it's going to take a lot of analysis to make sure we understand how those rockets and their plumes are going to affect our vehicle and its control as we get closer to the surface.
Some of those precision landing technologies that we'll need to land humans on Mars one day are already being developed and tested now.
Yes, we need to precisely land, and we need to avoid hazards, both natural hazards like rocks and craters, and things that we've put on the surface earlier to support the humans. Both of those things are going to take some very advanced sensors. For precision landing, we're going to use terrain relative navigation to really pinpoint our location on the surface. Mars 2020 is actually flying that technology for the first time, so we'll get to see how it works. Then we're going to use a navigation Doppler LiDAR and a hazard detection LiDAR to get us down to the surface. The navigation Doppler LiDAR will give us a very precise velocity and distance to our landing site. The hazard detection LiDAR will give us a real-time map of the hazards in the area so that we can avoid them.
But even once all of those precision landing sensors kick in, the landing is still not complete. We're still not on the ground yet.
Now we're really close to the surface. We found our safe landing site and we're on our way down. But we have 8 huge engines under our vehicle pointed down at Mars, and they might dig a huge crater as we try to land. In order to understand the effect of these plume surface interactions, we're advancing our modeling tools and doing ground tests to anchor those computer models so that we can better predict what's going to happen. We're really excited about this area because it's also applicable to lunar missions. As we send small robotic landers up through human scale to the moon with Artemis, plume surface interactions will be very important. We can't easily test this large system in the right conditions at Earth, so we rely heavily on computer models and simulations to make sure that the system's going to work from entry all the way through landing. Langley has over a century of expertise in atmospheric flight, and so we're applying all of that history and knowledge to our flights to Mars. NASA Langley is leading the way in developing the entry, descent, and landing technologies we'll need for future Mars missions and for eventually putting humans on the surface.
The Virginia Air and Space Science Center is open with brand new interactive exhibits and state-of-the-art exhibit technology. Discover a world of hands-on exploration that's fun for the whole family in our new Space Explorer Gallery. Full of state-of-the-art gaming and interactive simulation, your family will have a blast exploring outer space. Enjoy an experience that's truly larger than life in our updated IMAX theater. The Virginia Air and Space Science Center, your gateway to family fun.
For more than 40 years, Cox has been investing in Hampton Roads. Our fiber network is built to deliver gig speeds to the region, enabling smart homes, businesses, and a smart community today, and to support the Internet of Things and 10G tomorrow. We're keeping the 757 connected to the things that matter most. Find out more at cox.com.
It's definitely sad that we can't put on the play at school, and it was gonna be like my first musical at the school.
Being away from my drama friends, I keep things to myself more, and I can't really connect to anyone.
My expectation was that I was gonna be on the stage with a bunch of friends, and I'm really sad that I couldn't do that.
They're theater kids, so they perform, and they want to put that strong face forward, and it makes me very proud as their teacher, but I know that they are missing out on those opportunities.
I've never done anything like this, so hopefully you guys think this is as cool as I do. I think this is really different and weird and awesome. Hands up if you're ready to start. Top of the page, we'll start again. The director approaches a sheepish mouse.
I'm not going out there. There's like 1,000 people, maybe 1 billion.
Yeah, I think that works great. Fairy godmother swings by.
Logan, if you drop me, I am so breaking up with you!
Something that was really clear in talking to all the kids at Thurman White Middle School was that their friendships, their social existence is entirely born out of being creative with other people. And there you are.
That's cool. I love that.
That's me. I'm cute.
I'm a cartoon now.
When you're not looking at it, there's nothing. But when I look, the little face appears. Hi, how are you?
Not helping! Not helping!
He still hasn't figured out how to get me in the play. Like that?
That's great.
Don't worry, Gracie. The curtain only goes up when we all have a part to play. I believe in you, Terrence.
The cartoon was just, it was just so cool.
There's like 1,000 people, maybe 1 billion.
Pretend everyone in the audience is in their underwear and you'll be fine.
My parents are in the audience.
A play without Gracie is like a unicorn without a horn.
A fairy godmother without a wand.
A dragon without fire.
Toadstools without toes. Or stools.
Helping! This makes me feel like I'm a part of something bigger.
I think that the most fun part of it was that it was like a community, so everyone got to experience these things together, and we can all look back and say, like, this was what we did together.
It seems almost impossible to have that all converge together into one beautiful performance, but through the magic of these technologies and animation, we're actually able to make that happen, and it's super wonderful to see come together.
2 minutes till showtime.
Mars 2020 rover.
We have to fly this vehicle through the eye of a needle at 13,000 miles per hour, 300 million miles away from home. And so there are a few things we have to get right to do that. Between launch and landing, the spacecraft is on a 203-day trip from Earth to Mars. And so the navigation team is tracking it, and we're doing some instrument checkouts of equipment along the way. We're getting the team prepared for the events leading up to entry, descent, and landing. We have some tough choices to make to fly the spacecraft, when we're going to perform maneuver, and if we're going to update any of the parameters on board the spacecraft. I have worked on a few Mars missions since arriving here at NASA Langley almost 20 years ago now. And I started right away on my first day on the job working on what would become the Mars Science Laboratory, or MSL, that landed in 2012. This mission, Mars 2020, is a build-to-print of that entry, descent, and landing system. And so it's allowed us to learn how the system performed last time for MSL. And this time around, we've tweaked a few things. We've added a few additional capabilities. We've added the range trigger, which is a new way of triggering the parachute deployment. That allows us to land closer to the target. And we've added a terrain relative navigation system, which allows us to land in a very rugged place, which is Jezero Crater. The next step for Mars, and we're very excited about this, is the Mars Sample Return Project. And Mars Sample Return is really a series of 3 missions. Mars 2020 is really the first step of those 3 missions. Perseverance rover has a sample and caching system on board. And so for the first time on Mars, after we land, we're going to have the capability to collect samples and store those samples in test tubes that we can then return back to Earth. There are teams already working on the follow-on missions to then go and retrieve and return those samples back to Earth. Beyond that, NASA is looking to send humans to Mars. Some of the capability on the Perseverance rover is we're carrying an instrument that will allow us to make oxygen from the carbon dioxide of the atmosphere of Mars. And that's a technology demonstration that provides some feed forward to a human mission in the future. So it's a very exciting time on Mars right now. Check back later to find out more about how NASA Langley is helping to land rovers on Mars.
The Virginia Air and Space Science Center is open with brand new interactive exhibits and state-of-the-art exhibit technology. Discover a world of hands-on exploration that's fun for the whole family in our new Space Explorer Gallery. Full of state-of-the-art gaming and interactive simulation, your family will have a blast exploring outer space. Enjoy an experience that's truly larger than life in our updated IMAX theater. The Virginia Air and Space Science Center, your gateway to family fun.
My mom, she was my inspiration for becoming a nurse. I miss my mom and the ability to show her physical love.
My family lives 6 hours north. I would go once or twice a month to go see them. But starting at the end of March, I stopped going up because it's very dangerous.
My parents, they wouldn't mind if I was there all the time. But I've pulled away. I miss the freedom of just going over there and hanging out and not having to worry.
My mom, she's always looking after you, making sure you're fed. So I miss that about her a lot.
My mom, she would make a Puerto Rican dish or an Italian dish, and those were always so delicious.
My mom, she loves to feed us. So she'd call me, hey, I made this or I made that. But I would make up excuses not to be around.
Oh my god, I'm about to cry! It's so good, thank you.
That is incredible.
I sent you some files and you've been working so hard.
Pero ahí van tus tamales.
Oh my god, they're so good.
Okay, how proud I am. And I miss you.
Ha extrañado mucho la comida y de estar juntos.
You got everything in here that I wanted.
Gracias, Mom. Gracias, Dad, por la comida.
I love you.
I love you more. Thank you so much. This really made my day.
Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Bob McKenna, President and CEO of the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. And on behalf of NASA Langley Research Center and the Peninsula Chamber, I'd like to welcome you to the return of Spotlight on the Peninsula after a 14-month sabbatical. In 2020, our Spotlight series was going to be focused on science and technology and the Peninsula's many great assets in the science and technology arena. We all know what happened with 2020. So now we're hitting reset with this series and moving forward. What better place to start anew than NASA Langley Research Center, and specifically the Perseverance mission to Mars. As many of you know, Spotlight on the Peninsula has been a monthly free series. The intent of the series is to shine a spotlight on critical components of the economic growth engine of the peninsula. A subtitle could be Making the Peninsula Cool and Prosperous Again. We often hear that the peninsula has an inferiority complex. The Chamber is here to help smash that false narrative and to do our part to instill more confidence in the residents of the peninsula. It's kind of like a pep rally for the peninsula. There's a lot of great things going on here, and we try to showcase them in this series. Did you know, for instance, that the peninsula has the highest concentration of scientists in the United States? It's true. Some of them do very amazing and important work at NASA Langley Research Center, and we'll hear from a few today. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome some distinguished guests. U.S. Congressman Bobby Scott, State Senator Monty Mason, representing Senator Mark Warner's office, Drew Lumpkin, Hampton City Mayor Donnie Tuck, Sharon Scott from the Peninsula Airport Commission and the Newport News City Council, Captain Jay Schneider, Commanding Officer of Naval Weapons Station Yorktown. Go Navy, the greatest force for freedom in the history of the world. Colonel Clint Ross, Commander 633rd Air Based Wing. Go Navy. Sorry, Clint, we are the best. We're also pleased to have students from the following Peninsula schools in our audience today. Queens Lake Middle School, Phoebus Middle School, Bridgeport Academy, Hunter B. Andrews Elementary and Middle School, Bethel High School, Hampton High School, Denby High School, Benjamin Sims Middle School, and Huntington Middle School. We also have York County Public School students on, but I'm not sure what school specifically, so I'll just say quickly, York, Grafton, Tab, Bruton. And now a big thank you to today's sponsors. These sponsors make it possible to offer events like this for free. The City of Hampton Economic Development Department, thanks Chuck Rigney and team. Virginia Air and Space Science Center, thanks Bob Grismer. And if you all haven't been to the Virginia Air and Space Science Center lately, you got to check it out. And they're open 10 to 5 on Wednesday through Saturday and 12 to 5 on Sundays. And our series presenting sponsor and longtime and very important chamber partner, Cox, Virginia. Representing Cox today is my friend, Sarah Buck. Sarah is the Senior Manager of Public Affairs for Cox, Virginia. Her focus is working towards building a better future through business development opportunities, digital equity programs, and corporate social responsibility. Sarah currently serves on the Virginia Peninsula Chamber's Board of Directors and the Hampton Roads Chamber's Communications Committee. She has a bachelor's degree in communication studies from Virginia Tech. Wait for it. Let's go Hokies. In 2016, Sarah was recognized as one of Hampton Roads' top 40 under 40 by Inside Business and is a Girl Scout Council of Colonial Coast future famous former. Try to say that quickly 3 times. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah Buck.
Hi, Bob. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am so excited for this presentation today. It's truly amazing what technology can do. And of course, it's because of technology that we're all able to be here together today. And while we'd certainly prefer to hold these events in person, technology has made it so much easier for us to stay connected and keep moving forward in our new normal. I'd also like to recognize how great it is that so many teachers are taking the opportunity to share this experience with their classes today. I just think that is so cool. Cox's philanthropy is rooted in youth education. Our founder, many of you might not know this, but our founder, James M. Cox, was actually an educator before going into journalism and then creating what we know today as Cox Enterprises. So that's why we're really committed to supporting youth education, to supporting organizations like the Boys and Girls Clubs, partnering with our school systems to make sure students are connected while they're in school, and why we've committed millions of dollars to continue our low-cost student internet program, Connect to Compete, so students and their families can stay connected while they're at home too. On behalf of Cox employees in Hampton Roads and across the state of Virginia, it's my pleasure to support the Chamber in bringing you this exciting program today. I can't tell you how important STEM education is, and it's so great to see so many students here actively engaged in this presentation. I'd now like to introduce you to Mr. Jeff Harris. Mr. Harris serves as the Deputy Director for Space Technology and Exploration at NASA's Langley Research Center. Mr. Harris has nearly 30 years of experience and has served NASA in various leadership roles and is recognized both nationally and internationally as a technical authority and expert in the fields of electrical engineering and in entry, descent, and landing technologies. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Jeff Harris.
Thank you, Ms. Buck. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jeff Harris, and I am the Deputy Director for Space Technology and Exploration at NASA's Langley Research Center. We're excited to be able to talk with you today about the Mars 2020 mission, and in particular, the successfully landing the Perseverance rover on the surface of Mars. Now, as an introduction, let me give you a little information about Langley Research Center. NASA Langley Research Center dates back to 1917 as our nation's first civilian aeronautics research and development laboratory. And then it was under the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which was called NACA, NACA. Then in 1958, we formed NASA, and Langley continues to this day to be a critical national research and development center supporting missions in aeronautics, science, and space. Now, since today is being hosted by the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, let me give you just a few numbers on the Langley Research Center's economic impact. So Langley Research Center is comprised of 188 buildings on our 406-acre campus here in Hampton, Virginia. And we directly employ about 3,500 civil servants and contractors on center. In our Hampton Roads area, we create just over 8,000 jobs and over $900 million in business. Across the state of Virginia, we create almost 9,000 jobs and $1.1 billion in business. And across our nation, Langley creates almost 18,000 jobs and $2.3 billion in business. So, okay, let's get to the Mars 2020 mission. Our conversation today is going to focus on the riskiest part of our Mars 2020 mission, getting the Perseverance rover from interplanetary space and velocities through the Martian atmosphere and safely onto the surface of Mars. We call this phase entry, descent, and landing, or EDL. So as you might guess, missions to Mars are very difficult. We humans have sent a total of 49 missions to Mars, and 25 of those have failed. Mars has seen 14 landing attempts, of which 9 have led to successful surface missions. Now, something we can all be proud of is that all of those successful surface missions were NASA missions. And we are still the only country to have successful surface missions at Mars. And all of those successes had Langley Research Center doing the work to make sure that the vehicle system would reach the surface safely. And that is what we're going to talk about today. We have a great group of people whom I've had the pleasure of working with for several years. They have been and continue to be critical to our, not just NASA's, but our nation's successful missions to Mars. So to get things started, let me introduce the moderator for today. It's my friend and colleague, Ms. Michelle Monk. Michelle is NASA's principal technologist for entry, descent, and landing, and the agency's entry, descent, and landing systems capability lead. She has over 30 years of experience in orbital mechanics, trajectory simulation, and flight hardware development. And she is also the principal investigator for 2 lunar camera payloads. So thank you for being here today, Michelle, and take it away.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here today. Really exciting times. Just less than 2 months ago, we successfully landed Perseverance on the surface of Mars, and this team was a core part of that effort. So we're excited to share our experiences with our audience today and give Hampton Roads a behind-the-scenes look at actually what took place on February 18th and the many years leading up to it. So we'll be highlighting NASA Langley's role in the mission today and taking your questions, so be ready. We have a very distinguished panel today of folks who have lived and breathed this mission for the past several years. And so I'm going to introduce them first, and then we are going to watch the animation of the Perseverance, the Mars 2020 mission's entry, descent, and landing sequence to kind of get everybody oriented as to the events that took place that day. And then each of our panelists represents a particular area of interest and expertise on the EDL sequence, and we'll get a more in-depth look at what really happened on February 18th and what we're doing now to look forward to future missions. So first, I'd like to introduce our panel members, and then we'll watch the animation. So first we have David Way, who was the Mars 2020 Flight Mechanics and Simulation Lead. David was responsible for leading the team that did that very important job of making sure that the whole system was going to work together successfully. Next, we have Ms. Carly Zumwalt, a flight mechanics engineer who was on David's team and actually did a lot of work on the parachute for Mars 2020. She'll be telling us about some of her work there. And then Mr. Henry Wright, who was the Mars Entry, Descent, and Landing Instrumentation 2 project manager, and we call that project Medley 2. We call it 2 because we actually did Medley the first time on the Mars Science Laboratory in 2012. And Medley is an instrumentation system that tells us engineers how we designed our heat shield. And so I was involved in that first Medley. It was extremely exciting and we got awesome data, and I can't wait for Henry to share with you all what we found out from Medley 2 so far. So thank you to all of our panelists. And now, Kristen, if you wouldn't mind cueing the animation, we'll take a look at that, and I'll sort of narrate as we go on through it. It's about 3 minutes long to give everybody a top-level view of what happened. So this is February 18th of this year, just less than 2 months ago. And here we are in interplanetary space, and as you've heard from Jeff, we are approaching the planet with our Mars 2020 vehicle. We see the heat shield, and that's the cruise stage that provides power during the trip out to Mars, and that cruise stage just dropped off. We don't need it for the entry. As we encounter the atmosphere at 13,000 miles an hour, we see the flow begin to come onto the heat shield. You saw some thrusters in the back of the vehicle that are used to steer us towards our landing site. Here we are going through the high energy portion of our trajectory, and here's a view inside of the rover, tucked inside that aeroshell and that white back shell, being protected from the high heating and the loads. Once we get down to supersonic speeds, we deploy our parachute, as you just saw. And then, once we've slowed down enough, we will drop our heat shield away because we don't need it anymore, and we need for the rover to be able to see the surface to help us to land safely. So there goes the heat shield, and there goes the Medley 2 hardware. Bye. And now the parachute and the back shell go away, and we have our descent stage that's going to lower the Perseverance rover down on cables towards the surface. You see us steering and decelerating the rover down towards the landing site. This happens with 8 thrusters, and you see the wheels of the rover tucked up there. And in a moment, we'll begin to see the rover being suspended from the descent stage. There it's lowered down on cables, and once it touches the surface, the descent stage releases it and then flies away to a safe distance, and it will crash. And now the Perseverance rover is ready to do its job, its awesome job of collecting samples that can be later returned to Earth for analysis in Earth laboratories, something that's never been done before. So we're really excited about Perseverance's first job of helping us return samples to Earth. Okay, so with that overview, I'd like to turn it over to David to tell us a little bit about the behind the scenes of how Langley helped get Perseverance to the surface. Take it away, David.
All right, thanks, Michelle. And I am just thrilled to be talking to everyone today and to let you know a little bit about how we at the Langley Research Center helped to land the Perseverance rover. And we're doing this literally in your backyard on the peninsula, and we're very proud of that. And simply stated, our job is to safely land this rover, to slow it down from just incredibly fast speeds of over 12,000 miles an hour to 0, to do that before we run out of altitude, and to land the rover safely in Jezero Crater, which is a very dangerous place to land. Jezero Crater is a place that we've thought about landing in the past and rejected that landing site because it was just too dangerous to attempt a landing. But this time around, we're only able to do it because we used a proven entry, descent, and landing system that we used for the Mars Science Laboratory when we landed Curiosity back in 2012. And we added to that some new technology, specifically the terrain relative navigation, which allowed us to, for the first time, to land figuratively with our eyes open. This system works by first taking a grid of the entire landing area at 10 by 10 meter pixels, which is about the size of half of a tennis court. And for each one of those little half tennis court size areas, we assigned a numerical value for how safe it was to land if we were to land at that very spot. And we did that for the whole landing area. And then as we're descending on the parachute, we're going to take pictures with a camera, and we're going to identify landmarks that we can see in those pictures so that we know where we are. And then we're going to choose the specific pixel that's in our general area, local to us, that is the most safe, and then we're going to fly to that spot. So it's kind of a big responsibility to have to try to land these rovers safe, and particularly at Jezero, which is very scary, as I said. And I am just over the moon and thrilled to say that we did it. Yes. And so it was a successful landing. And we'll talk to you in a moment and walk you through one of the, I think, which is most exciting parts or coolest parts of the mission, which is the sky crane landing. And in a moment, Carly will talk to you about the parachute, and Henry will talk about that medley system that Michelle mentioned. But first, I want to want to introduce you to what our contribution actually was to that whole project. Carly and I are what we consider flight mechanics is our area of expertise. And what that means is that we study the motion of spacecraft as they fly through space or through an atmosphere. And so we use computer simulations, which are a collection of computer models of both the spacecraft and its systems and Mars and its environment. And then we virtually land the spacecraft in this virtual simulation. And we do that thousands of times so that we can collect statistics on our performance. And we do that on a supercomputer that's housed in a building that's named in honor of Katherine Johnson. And I think that's really cool because Katherine Johnson did these very same calculations by hand back in the Mercury days. So that's it. In a nutshell, that's what we do. We use a computer to answer questions about the environment that the vehicle is going to experience when it enters the atmosphere. How high will it be? How fast will it be going? How long will it take? And we provide that information to the rest of the engineering team that's helping to design and build this landing system, and help to make and inform design choices, and ultimately provide the confidence that everything is going to go according to plan. So with that, let me bring up, hi Michelle, as I bring up my video, I'll talk to that real quick.
David, I was going to make sure that you told our audience how we actually did compared to how you thought we were going to do from your computer model.
Thank you. We actually did very well. I'll have to say there were a few moments during the landing that I was a little bit frightened. But when we look back at the data, most of it was right down the middle with how our computer simulations had predicted. And what gave us a lot of confidence was having landed the MSL system back in 2012. We did a fantastic job then as well. And so each time we land, we learn more. And we're in the process right now of reconstructing the events that happen, comparing those to our simulations, and providing recommendations for engineers in the future on which models we need to tweak a little bit. But overall, it was very much just like the simulations that we ran. And by the way, we worked on this mission for over 8 years. And during that time, we landed on our virtual Mars over 14 million times before we got to try it in real life. So let me share my screen. And I will walk you through the sky crane maneuver. Okay, so here we are. We are at the moment that we're about ready to separate and drop out of the back shell with our rocket-powered jetpack of the sky crane. We've already made it through the very challenging entry environment. We've already deployed the parachute. We've already removed our heat shield. And this camera view is looking straight down from the belly of the rover. And I'll have to say real quick, I saw a tweet not long ago where somebody was complaining that our animations are getting so good that it's hard to tell the difference between the animation and real life. This entire video is real life. These are real photos of Mars as we are descending. At this point,
We are about 1.5 miles up. We are falling at about 180 miles an hour, which is really fast. And so we've got only about 28 more seconds before we hit the ground. And so if we don't do something, so we're going to light our rocket engines at this point, separate from the parachute and the back shell. And at that point is when we're going to choose the spot that we will land on. To the right of this image, just off screen, is the delta of Jezero Crater, which is a very steep 80-meter cliff. To the left, just off screen again, is the eventual spot that we're going to land on. And you can see just in this one view, some of the things that make Jezero so scary to land on. On the right, we have some very smooth terrain, which we kind of nicknamed the landing strip, this is where we kind of wanted to land. But on the left, we see some very rugged terrain with lots of rocks and boulders. And right there in the middle of the image is a great big crater with sand dunes that the rover wouldn't be able to drive out of if we were to land in. And so that's definitely a place right there that we did not want to land. And so this terrain relative navigation system allows us to avoid those very dangerous areas and target a safe spot to land. So I will start this up. And you'll see a little flash in the upper right. There you go.
Back shell set. Current velocity
now out of the back shell.
83 meters per second at about 2.6 kilometers from the surface of Mars. We have confirmation that the back shell has separated. We are currently performing the divert maneuver. Current velocity is about 75 meters per second at an altitude of about 1 kilometer off the surface of Mars.
Here in Safety Bravo.
We have completed our terrain relative navigation. Current speed is about 30 meters per second, altitude of about 300 meters off the surface of Mars.
And now we are descending vertically right over the spot that we're going to land.
Accordion, which means we are conducting the sky crane.
And I'm going to pause it right here real quick. So we've just added a couple new views. The view in the upper left is going to be from the rover looking back up at the sky crane. And the view on the lower left is another camera that is mounted on the sky crane and looking down at the rover. And these videos are just incredible for me personally. After nearly 20 years of working on these Mars missions and imagining in my mind what these were going to look like, we, for the very first time, are going to get to watch an actual landing on Mars as it's happening. So very exciting. You'll see that in the lower panels. On the right, you can start seeing there's a bunch of dust and sand and soil that's being moved around by the thrust of our rocket engines as we get ready to do the sky crane maneuver. And at this point, we've really done all of the deceleration that we're going to do. We've gone from 12,000 miles an hour. We're now traveling about 2.5 feet per second. We're at about 24 feet above the ground, and we're about 10 seconds away from landing. And we're now going to lower the rover on these cables and get ready to touch down. And when you get close to touchdown, listen up for our call on the radio, which is Tango Delta, or TD for touchdown. And maybe you'll recognize the voice. So here we go.
About to conduct the sky crane maneuver. Sky crane maneuver has started. About 20 meters off the surface.
We're getting signals from MRO. Tango Delta.
Touchdown confirmed. Perseverance safely on the surface.
And away it goes. And there you saw at the very end, the rover touched down. It kind of gets lost into all of this dust and dirt that we're throwing around with the rocket engines. We cut those 3 cables.
and the sky crane lifts off and flies away to a safe distance. And what I love most about the sky crane system is once all of this dust, literally once all the dust settles, we have a rover, a 1-ton rover on the surface of Mars on its wheels, ready to do science. And almost as if it just sprang into existence into that exact spot. Or maybe it descended from the sky and was placed there very carefully in that very spot, which, as we know, is exactly what happened. So with that, I'm going to pass it off now. Back to Michelle first, and then to Carly.
Great, David. That was awesome. We do have one question from Neeraj. I'm sorry if I got your name incorrect. It says, hello, Dr. Way. I wanted to ask what the landing ellipse size was and whether any onboard Monte Carlos were done during EDL. Thank you.
Oh, great question. We don't do any Monte Carlos during the actual entry. Carly was one of the team that ran a lot of EDL Monte Carlos leading up to the very hours before entry, as we continue to tweak our situation and try to put the spacecraft in the best place to succeed. But once we get that close, there's an 11-minute, almost 11.5-minute time delay for the radio signals to travel from Mars. And so the entire spacecraft does the entry by itself, autonomously, without help from the ground. The size of our landing ellipse was about 7 kilometers. So that's probably about 2.5, 3 miles in diameter, which is pretty tight when you think that we've traveled 300 million miles, and then we're going to try to land on a spot that small that has lots of hazards in the area. But we were able to do that with the technology and experience that we've gained from landing on Mars before.
Okay, we're going to take one more question directly for David, and then we're going to go on to Carly to make sure we go through, and we'll pick up any remaining questions as we go, and then we have some extra time at the end. So if you do have a question, please feel free to keep typing those in the Q&A section, not in the chat, please. And I'll try to monitor those and moderate as we go to manage the time. So if I don't ask your question right away, don't worry, we'll be sure to get to it. So this one is from Lacey, that she asked, what fail-safes are in place in case something goes wrong with the sky crane? Thank you.
Wow, great question, Lacey. And the answer is there aren't very many. One of the challenges we have with entry, descent, and landing is we can only put so many systems on the spacecraft. We can only test so many of them out. And we don't really have the luxury of adding a lot of backups to backups. And so there are literally hundreds of things that have to happen exactly right in order to land on Mars. And that's what makes it so hard. So once we get into sky crane, one, just by getting there, we've already, so many things have gone right. And we're almost there. We just have a few more events in our sequence that we have to execute, but they all have to execute perfectly, right down to the very last moment when we cut that last cable, which was the umbilical that our electrical signals carried our electrical signals between the rover and the descent stage. Right up to that point, that cut has to happen, and they have to sever that connection, and the descent stage has to fly away. So even after the rover is on the ground, there's still very critical things that have to happen.
Thanks, David. Okay, on to you, Carly.
Thanks, Michelle. I think I have watched those sky crane videos probably on the order of 100 times, and every time they're still just as exciting and just as nerve-wracking to watch. So that was a really, really cool thing to share, Dave. As Michelle said, my name is Carly. I'm a flight dynamics engineer at NASA. I work with Dave Way, and just a little bit about me. I'm from the city of Houston. I grew up visiting the Johnson Space Center, which is where all the astronauts train. And I think when I was a kid, I probably asked my parents to go there on a monthly, if not weekly basis. I grew up with a love for what we do here at NASA. And for any of the students that are out there, I spent a lot of my middle school and high school years participating in some of the educational programs that NASA offers. So if any of you are interested in doing this as well, that's a really great place to get started. But this is what I've always dreamed of doing. And so it's absolutely incredible that after many years of hard work in school and in my career, that it's a reality. We've gotten to make it a reality. It's absolutely, in my mind, the coolest thing anybody could do for a living. I'm biased. So I'm a flight dynamics engineer, but I have also had the opportunity to work on the parachute system. And the parachute system is an extremely exciting part of the process. It's very nerve-wracking. As Dave mentioned when he answered the question previously, we don't have the chance to build redundancy into a lot of our system or to carry a backup or a fail-safe. So we really rely on a lot of these systems to work perfectly the first and only time they have a chance to fly. So for Perseverance, we flew a very similar parachute to what we've flown in the past. We've heard people talk about Curiosity and Mars Science Laboratory. That was actually a very similar design to what we flew on Perseverance. Of course, we're landing in a different place and we're examining different science, and we have a slightly different mission, but in terms of the overall system, it's pretty similar. As they mentioned, we've made some tweaks with terrestrial navigation and a couple little things like that. We've also made some tweaks to the parachute. So I'm going to share some pictures for you just to give you an idea of what the parachute looks like and how big it is. So, and then also what NASA Langley's role has been in developing some of this technology. So hopefully y'all are seeing that now. If you're not, please let me know. Okay, great, thank you. So what I'm showing y'all right now is a full-size picture of our parachute, or a picture of a full-size parachute. At Mars, we typically fly what we call a disc gap band parachute, or a DGB. It gets its name because the top part here is a disc shape, and then there's a gap right here, and then there's a band. So it's fairly straightforward. But it's proven to be a very successful parachute design for landing spacecraft on Mars. So it has what we call heritage. A lot of past missions have flown it, and we know a lot about it. Curiosity flew a very similar parachute of a very similar size. But as we mentioned before, we don't have a lot of backup. So we are very reliant on the parachute working in order for the rest of the entry, descent, and landing phase to go perfectly. So we're always checking, how can we do it better? What do we want to strengthen? What did we learn from the last mission that we might want to apply to this mission? And so one thing that we came out of Mars Science Laboratory with was a desire for a slightly stronger parachute. And when I say stronger, I just mean when we talk about some of these different lines and the materials, making them able to withstand more force or more load. So the parachute is our equivalent of putting the brakes on the car. It's, we're going about 1,000 miles per hour. When we deploy our parachute, it's about twice the cruising speed of a 747. We're going very, very fast, and we have to slow down. And really the biggest way we slow down on these missions is to put out our parachute. And so it's very important that it works, and we only have one chance to get it right. So a decision was made after Mars Science Laboratory to take the design of that parachute and make it stronger, beef it up. And so we haven't made the parachute much bigger, but we've made it heavier. And as you can imagine, if you change something on a spacecraft, that absolutely has to work. There's a lot of things that you have to do to convince people that you have made the right change, that the parachute's safe, that the mission's okay to rely on this technology. And so the parachute underwent a very lengthy process to certify it, to make sure that we were okay to put it on this mission. And so what we have here are 2 pictures of the parachute in a full-scale test. So we like to put our parachute in a wind tunnel. We like to understand how it's going to open, how it's going to move around. And that's what you can see here. There's some people here in the background for reference, but our parachute is about 70 feet across. So it's really, really big. It's the biggest parachute we've ever flown at Mars. And so we have to do a lot of work to make sure that we're comfortable using this parachute. So we had an extensive amount of testing, and some of that was done here at the Langley Research Center. So as Dave mentioned, we're flight dynamics engineers. We spend a lot of our time behind a computer. It's wonderful. We love what we do. But sometimes it's nice to get out from behind your computer and try something a little bit different. So I had the really wonderful opportunity to learn from some of our supersonic parachute experts here at the Langley Research Center and doing a wind tunnel test. So we have on the Air Force side of Langley what we call the transonic dynamics tunnel. And so we took that giant parachute, we make a smaller version of it, and we fly it in our wind tunnel. And the reason we do this is because we want to understand how the parachute's going to move around when it's introduced to the Martian air. That's really important for us. We need to know when we open the parachute how hard we're putting on the brakes, or what we call our drag. So we put the parachute in this wind tunnel, and then we can measure the drag. We can also measure how much the parachute's moving around. And what we're doing with that is we're building what we call an aerodynamics model. Aerodynamics model is basically just a fancy way of saying the way, understanding the way air moves around an object. But that model then goes into our flight dynamics simulation. And then when we run our 14 million landings to the ground, we have an understanding based off this wind tunnel test that was done here at Langley, how the parachute should move around based off that particular trajectory that we've generated. So it's really cool. It was a cool full circle moment for me to get to learn about a parachute, get to fly it in a wind tunnel. And this is a picture. This isn't the DISCAT band. For a while, we were considering another option. So this was the other option, but we also flew the DISCAT band in this test. But it was a neat moment to learn about a parachute, get to put it in a wind tunnel and test it out, get to collect data. We have some, and it's a little bit hard to see in this picture, we take measurements up here, right around the aeroshell, to collect that data, create an aerodynamics database for that parachute, fly it in our flight dynamics simulation, and then use that simulation to help land a spacecraft on Mars. You really get to see the life cycle of this entire part of the project. So it's really exciting. And then sort of the wonderful moment to cap it all off is getting to actually see a video. So as David mentioned when he showed the Sky Crane video, with the parachute, we've never gotten to see the parachute deploy. When we do our missions, we learn a lot about the previous mission and we use that to build a better model. But for the parachute, we're reliant on measurements that are taken inside the spacecraft about essentially how much the spacecraft is bouncing around. And then you have to sit there with sort of a fine-tooth comb and figure out, was that bounce the parachute opening, and was that bounce the parachute, the mortar firing? You have to use this one measurement to come up with as much information as you can about how the parachute worked and performed during flight. But if we have a video, it's all there. We can see it happening. And then we can correlate that to those measurements we're taking and really have a more complete understanding of how our parachute actually performed at Mars. So this is extremely exciting for us, not just because it's cool to look at, but also it really helps us learn more about how this parachute works. So I'm going to show you a video. It's going to have 2 side-by-side images. It's the same video, just the left side is going to be slowed down a little bit. And it's a pretty quick one. But what you're seeing is the parachute coming out of the pack that it stores in on the back of the aeroshell. It comes out, and then it opens up and it bounces around. And all this bouncing around motion is what we were trying to capture in our aerodynamics model when we were in the wind tunnel. And so the things we care about on the parachute can sometimes happen in a fraction of a second, or you know, a little over a second. And those kind of things can be really hard to figure out or to find in that data that we get on board the spacecraft. So by being able to slow down these images and see, you know, at a really small time step what exactly is happening, it gives us a much better understanding for how the parachute's moving and how these events are happening. And then we can go back in our models and say, we thought it was going to take a second to deploy the parachute. You know, it only took 0.8 seconds. And then we'll make that change, and that change will continue down the line for any other systems that uses this parachute. Another cool thing, if any of y'all followed along with some of the Easter egg spoilers, you'll notice we have kind of an interesting pattern on our parachute. It's really helpful for us because we need to understand not just how it opened, but also how it's moving around. And so we can use those different color spots to help do what we call photogrammetry. But also, for any of you out there who want to go look this up, there is a cool message that's hidden inside that parachute. So I'll let you try to figure it out on your own, or you can go online and look it up. But there's always fun little things like that hidden away in each of these missions. And this is a cool one. So that's all I have for the parachutes. But it's really exciting to, as an engineer, work very hard in school and dream about something, and then get to see it happen. And so I just want to encourage anybody out there who might think this is a cool career, or there's another career they have, to work really hard, because if it's something that you've dreamed about and something that you're willing to put the effort in, it's so worth it when it happens. Getting to see this stuff and getting to work with Dave Way and Henry and all the incredible people that are on our team absolutely makes all of that effort worth it. So I will stop sharing and pass it off to Michelle again.
Thank you, Carly. That was an awesome explanation, and I really enjoyed your personal story as well. And I can say I definitely share it. We have the coolest jobs anywhere, and it's especially awesome when you get to see it all go right, as we did on February 18th. One thing that we didn't really talk about that I want to make sure the audience realizes is, as Carly said, we've never had these camera views before. So this was the first time on the Mars 2020 system that we had cameras on the rover looking up at the sky crane, cameras on the sky crane looking down at the rover, and then these 3 parachute cameras looking up at the deployment. And so really, as Carly explained, to get those real-time data to feed back into our models is really so satisfying for we engineers. I always say, you know, after you took a test in school, what's the first thing you want to know? Mm-hmm. How you did, right? So the whole world sees the rover safely on the surface, but we really want to know, hey, how did our system work? Was it an A+ or a C-? Did we just barely make it? And so that's what these awesome cameras are telling us, and the ability to go back and correlate that to our tests and our simulation is what allows us to send a bigger, heavier, more capable lander in the future, and eventually humans.
It's really nice. As David mentioned, we've all been working this project for years. We've spent nights, weekends running simulations for 8 years, and it can sometimes, when you've seen it so many times, almost not feel real in the moment. And then you get the videos and you think, oh, yeah, no, that was real. That happened, and that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. So it's also a fun validation for all that hard work to see it actually really, really happen.
Absolutely. All right, let me scan the questions here. Okay. So along that vein of getting information about how we did, we're going to turn it over to Henry now. He was fortunate enough to be successful in implementing, as the project manager, instrumentation on the heat shield and the back shell to tell us how those systems actually did during entry. And this is only the second time we've ever measured these quantities. So we're really excited to get that information back and incorporate it into our models and design our system even better the next time. So Henry, take it away.
Well, thank you, Michelle. So to answer your question about what was your grade, I'd give it an A+. So the landing was great, and everything operated as intended. So and we have the data to prove it. So so one of those things, you know, to bring this all around is back around Thanksgiving in 2013, I had my very first Medley 2 meeting, and Michelle was actually chairing that meeting. And so after almost 6.5 years, we finally see the culmination of that effort 2 months ago. And it's pretty amazing to actually have that feeling that you actually get to see this this thing to come to fruition, things you built and designed actually come forward. During the 6-year trek, we had over 130 people directly supporting our efforts here at Langley, as well as some folks at JPL and also some folks at NASA Ames. So no matter what, it takes a team to accomplish these things. You know, nobody does this alone. You know, Carly and Dave showed you a bunch of those elements as well that that they're working on and how that works. So, so what is Medley 2? So one of the things you think about is when you pack your stuff for a trip in your duffel bag or a suitcase, or when you put your stuff in your backpack to go to school, you depend upon that suitcase or that backpack to protect your stuff from the world around it, from the rain, from heavy things hitting it, you know, just keeping it all together. So for the Perseverance rover, we did have that basically a suitcase, and it's called the aeroshell. Let me show you what that looks like in a little bit more detailed fashion. And it looks like, oh, all right. So I have my screen my screen sharing is disabled, so won't be able to actually show that to you. All right, sorry about that. Anyway, so what I was going to show you was some images of our aeroshell at Lockheed when it was when our hardware was being installed. And so the things we want to think about is what happens to it? How hot does this aeroshell get? We want to keep our suitcase safe because what's inside of it is also important. We want to keep that safe as well. And so that's where Medley 2 comes in, is to actually understand what are the environments that happen to this suitcase, this aeroshell. And so, okay. Sorry, we're having technologies challenges right now. Share. Sorry for the interruption, folks. We tried this earlier and one more time. All right, never mind. We'll go without it. So anyway, so Medley 2 is there to really understand what happens to those, you know, provide sensors to understand what happens to that aeroshell. So Medley 2 stands for Mars Entry, Descent, and Landing Instrumentation 2, and Michelle had mentioned that previously. But as Dave and Carly had mentioned earlier, landing on Mars is really hard. Not only is it done automatically, just like the question that Dave answered, there's so many things that have to happen in sequence automatically, one at a time, and any one of those things can fail it. And so as part of that, there's a lot of things we don't know, or we know to some level. So we have uncertainties that we apply into those models. And so when we do those analysis and testing, we think, what's the worst that could happen? What's the best that could happen? We try and apply all of those uncertainties to try and make sure we understand what that range is. And so that's where Medley 2 comes in, is we collect information that lets us give that data to Dave and Carly and others to help improve their understanding. We want to understand how well that aeroshell or that suitcase performed. What environments did it actually see? So we get that information that helps us to just basically understand exactly what happened. So the thing to keep in mind is, while Mars has an atmosphere that we can take advantage of to slow the vehicle down, having that atmosphere gives us a bunch of challenges. So as the vehicle flies through the atmosphere of Mars, it generates a lot of friction. Just going that fast through a gas, through an atmosphere, you get a lot of heating. Think, you know, when you rub your hands together, but magnified 100-fold or 1,000-fold. And so things get really hot at that point. So what do? We have to protect that vehicle by putting the insulation all around it, on the front and on the back. So what do we care about on that insulation is, yes, obviously, does it work? because you don't want to burn the vehicle up, but we want to understand how well it performs. And so what we do is we put a bunch of sensors inside of this insulation, and that lets us understand how hot it actually got. And from there, we can then back out all the various parameters on how well it worked. And then we can decide in the future, hey, did that insulation work as well as we wanted it to? Do we need as much? Could we cut some back? That might save us some mass or some weight that we could then add to the rover for extra science. Or maybe it becomes smaller and we can now go ahead and use the, save money that way too. So, so basically, sorry, there we go. Yes, that's the image I was looking for, Michelle. Thank you so much. So you can see there, you see the heat shield there in the background, and you can see the back shell here, and you can see the people there. That gives you a sense of scale of how big this this heat shield and back shell are. So thanks for the assist there, Michelle. I appreciate that. See, it takes a team. Even in these technology, even in these elements here, we still have to have our teammates come and save us. So that's always a good thing. Got to have a staff. So once we understand how well that insulation performs, like I said, we may be able to save some mass, and that can turn into something we put on the rover or maybe a smaller launch vehicle if we needed to. The other thing about the atmosphere, gives us the drag force. And so while Carly uses the drag force for the parachute aspect, we also have just this blunt body going through the atmosphere. It slows down as well. So if you throw a ball through the atmosphere, through the air, you see eventually the drag just slows it down and it hits the ground. Same kind of principle is applied here. So we have a bunch of pressure sensors that we put all over this vehicle so we can understand what the pressure is or how much drag it's actually seeing during the entry. We have them on the front, and we have them on the back. And part of these also help us understand how the atmosphere of Mars changes, what the density is up high, what the density is down low, because we don't actually have all the weather stations like we have on Earth. So our understanding of the density of the atmosphere of Mars is fairly limited. And so we have a lot of basic equations, what we call hydrostatic equations. Basically, if you go to the bottom of the swimming pool, how your ears feel kind of a lot of pressure, same kind of thing with an atmosphere. And so what we do is we actually use this data to better understand the density. We can then put that into atmosphere models as well. So we use our data not just for the vehicle, but also to help those who do atmospheric modeling on Mars as well. So all of that helps us to understand how the vehicle flew. And part of the reason we care about that is if we can improve our knowledge of how the vehicle flies, we can actually make these landing targets even smaller, get the footprints even smaller, and get to those good science sites that Dave and Carly talked about earlier. You know, Dave talked about how small the footprint is. By understanding the aerodynamics and how well the vehicle flies, that footprint can get even smaller. So for Medley 2, we had a total of 28 different sensors all over the vehicle. So we had 7 pressure sensors on the front, 17 temperature measurements on the front, 1 pressure and 7 temperatures, and 3 heating measurements on the back. So the heating measurements were something I haven't talked about, but so it's not just the temperature, which is the response of the vehicle, it's the actual amount of heat that's applied. So we had sensors that would tell us, you know, how much heating was actually there on the back, which is a place we really don't have a lot of data. So we actually, when we're doing our analysis there, we come up with our worst case, and then we double it and we say, okay, we're going to design it for twice that because we just don't know. And getting this extra data will help reduce that uncertainty factor, which then could say, hey, maybe we can reduce some of that mass. So that's all good. Medley 2 also included the custom electronics to collect all this information, do all the signal conditioning, and then put it into a digital form so we could then talk to the computer that lives on the rover, because all of our data was eventually transmitted over to the rover onto its computer and into its data storage. So all of that was part of what we had to go do. So, hey, Kristen, can you go ahead and pull up what I had for figure 1, please? So Medley 2 was turned on about 5¼ hours before the landing. And we did that so that we could actually let our electronics warm up, as well as to get a good set of these initial conditions. You know, basically what 0 is on our pressures because you're in the vacuum of space, and how cold the insulation was when it first started. So what you can see in this figure, and you didn't realize there's going to be data and a curve and a quiz, but over here on the right-hand side, that's the data from the front. So we show how high the temperature is, which is what that dashed line is, and we show what the what the solid line is, and the dashed line is the pressures. We measured something like about 1,000 degrees centigrade, which is about 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit in that insulation, which means that the surface temperature was somewhere around 1400 degrees temperature or 2500 degrees Fahrenheit. So pretty hot. On the left, you see some of the things we measured on the back. So we had some pressure data, we had our heating data. So that's all information we use to improve our knowledge, trying to understand exactly how things flew. You can take that figure now down, Kristen, appreciate that, thank you. And so once we actually have that data, like I said, we take that, we provide that to our science team, they go through and understand exactly what happened, take that information, and then they give it to the people who do the modeling. So Kristen, if you want to call up the heat shield video, that'd be great. Okay. So basically from the video that was earlier in the, here we go, thank you. Like I said, it takes a team. So you can see that the video, the heat shield falling away, and on that as it went by, pretty much everything that's not black that was on that heat shield or shiny silver is part of the Medley 2 system. So you see the gold coppery colored harnessing, there's a electronics box that's basically the size of like 2 laptops, and then all the various sensors that are all over that. So that's one of my, but the idea is that after 6.5 years of work, we get to see our hardware. It's done its job, and it's finally being separated from the vehicle. So on that day of landing day, our team was in our control room on NASA Langley Research Center. We were all excited. We'd finished seeing our real-time data come through. We realized how well it all performed. We understood that we had met our goal of getting this new EDL data to help us learn new things. So our team was incredibly excited. So I was very happy. So once Perseverance landed, the rest of the mission was getting ready to get started. We had actually finished ours. Our science data collection was complete. We were actually the first one to finish getting our data. And now we're ready to get started on how well the EDL system performed. So the thing to keep in mind also as part of this, it takes 10 minutes for the radio signals to get from Mars back to Earth. So while we were watching it, it actually had happened 10 minutes ago, or listening, seeing the data come through. So we knew we had our good data because we'd had some real-time data, but we didn't have all of it. And all of it was going to come a few days later because the rover had a number of critical information, critical data sets they had to send back first to show the state of health of the rover. That the temperatures were okay, the videos were working correctly, that the computers were doing what they needed to do, and all of those kinds of things. So all of that was critical to get back to make sure that the JPL team knew the status of the rover. But now, 3 days later, we got our data back. We had finally hit the right priority. We get our data back, and the team has now been working on that ever since. So essentially 2 months ago, they started working on that, and now we'll have our data analyzed and completed in about 6 months. So we're well on our way to getting that data analyzed and providing that over to the model folks, the analysis folks like Dave and Carly and others. So we're already seeing a lot of really interesting things that we did not expect. Good. So in conclusion, it's a great day. We had an excellent time getting everything. It was a really long slog to get here, but I'm very proud to be part of this team. It's very inspirational to be part of this big group to make these kinds of things happen. And so now we're getting ready for our next phase, which is finishing the analysis and moving on to the next thing to help future missions. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Michelle, and thank you.
Thanks, Henry. That's awesome. I remember the feeling. On the surface. Sorry, I was muted. I remember that bittersweet feeling when you put all that hard work into that hardware, and then you know it's done its job, but then you see it falling to the surface as trash. It's kind of sad.
Yeah, it is bittersweet, but hey, it's done its job. It's done what it's supposed to do. So it's a good thing. So we're all really happy with that. So that's good.
Yep, absolutely fantastic job. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Okay, well, we have a few questions queued up in the Q&A box here, and I will start with one from Julia, and maybe David would like to take this one. When will the next mission to pick up the samples, when will be the next mission to pick up the samples on Mars? And how far are you in developing this mission to pick up samples and bring them back to Earth?
Great question. There is a team that has already been working on the next mission, which is the sample return mission. They've been going for a few years already, and they are currently planning for a launch in 2026, I believe. So we've got about 5 more years, which really doesn't give them a lot of time. These missions, there's a lot of work that has to be done before you launch. And they have a lot of challenges because it's going to be a bigger system than we've landed before. And we're going to have to take all of our knobs and dial them up to 11 for this next one. And so I'm personally very excited to watch that unfold in the next 5 years.
Absolutely. Thanks, David. Let's see. I have one from, sorry, I might get the name wrong, Leonardly. If you can share, what significant data have you collected from the Perseverance already and can be factually stated about Mars? So I've been keeping up a little bit with the rover. It's just kind of done its checkout of its systems and it started driving around. So if any of the other panelists have some specific scientific results that they want to talk about or observations that they've made, that would be great.
Yeah, I think it's still a little too early for us that we're just now analyzing the data. A lot of it took kind of a long time to get back down. And so we don't, at least on the parachute side of the house, have anything concrete except to say a lot of what Dave mentioned earlier. You know, we're finding that being able to live and, you know, work in a branch of people that have done these projects for decades now, and learn from the previous project, that we've actually done a pretty good job on our end of modeling things the way that they actually flew. So while it's probably a little premature to put numbers to things yet, that's been impressive, at least for me. This is my second Mars mission, but very different from the previous mission. And to see that something can be so incredibly complex and we can do a pretty good job of getting some of it, a lot of it right, has been exciting. And while we don't have data back yet, I think the next thing that I'm looking forward to is, you know, we have Ingenuity on the surface and we're looking forward to that flight soon. And that's going to be the very first powered flight on another planet. So I think that's the next set of data that we're all excited to see. I saw on Reddit after we landed that someone mentioned that we just landed the first nuclear powered aircraft carrier on the surface of Mars. And it's not wrong, technically speaking. So there's a lot of cool things that are happening in the next couple of days and weeks on Ingenuity that we're pretty excited to the data come down from. But I would say it's probably a little too early, at least on my end, to make any strong claims about exactly how things went. But they went well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in general, the entry, descent, and landing performed very well. And, you know, as everyone has said, we have about a 6-month effort to really dive into all the data that we've collected and cross-reference. We're looking at videos of the surface to understand that plume surface interaction a little bit better, seeing what we can take away from every little piece of data that we've gotten so far. So there are many exciting discoveries to come, not only on the science side, obviously, but for us engineers as well. So I have a couple more questions here. Here's an interesting one from Jason. NASA and related programs have successfully integrated many technologies into everyday life, Velcro, for example. Are there any technologies that were developed for the Mars missions that you either know or are imagined could be mainstreamed? So, Carly.
Yeah, I have a favorite on this one because a friend of mine worked this. And Michelle, I think you're also very heavily involved at one point on this. But one of the things that Michelle mentioned in the introductory video was HIADs, hypersonic inflatables, and how when we fly future missions on Mars, we're going to have to do something other than a parachute to slow ourselves down. And that also, to link with what Henry talked about, if we're putting this big inflatable on the front, has to also become our heat shield. And so there's been a lot of work, and not by me, I'm speaking, the people that do the work are online, but a lot of work to develop flexible material that can withstand the kind of heat that we see at Mars. One application I have always thought was interesting and really cool to read about is a program called Chiefs, which is looking at building, using that flexible TPS material in an application for firefighters. There's a couple of tragedies in the past of firefighters needing to use emergency shelters, and those shelters not being able to withstand the temperatures and the heat that the firefighters ended up having to experience. And so applying that flexible TPS material to something like an emergency firefighter tent, I think is really, really cool. And it's a neat and very strong application to exactly what we do for a need here on Earth that is benefiting people that are putting their lives on the line. So I think that one has always stood out in my mind as being one of my favorite and what I think is one of the coolest things that we do with that technology.
Yeah, that is absolutely one of the best examples, Carly. Thank you. And I guess I'd mention, not just technologies that have become mainstreamed already, but the fact that NASA is building this much broader commercial space sector right now. And there's a lot of activity on lunar exploration and sending people back to the surface of the moon, as well as small robotic landers. And so, for instance, the terrain relative navigation technology that was used on Mars 2020 is now being used on those landers at the moon. And as that becomes, more available to more companies, I think we'll definitely see spin-offs of that technology. And we're spinning in from automotive technology as well in these sensors. So a lot of kind of circular or back and forth applications between the moon and Mars and the commercial space sector. Okay, we have about 8 or so minutes left, so let me make sure we keep going. I want to make sure I get this one in. This is from Lacey. Based on preliminary Medley 2 data, are there any ideas on what might be changed for the next Mars landing? Also, shout out to my dad, Henry Wright. So proud of all your hard work as well as your team.
Guess I have to send her money for that one. Kids in grad school always need money, right? Yeah, I guess part of the whole forward look is things like if the sample return lander says, hey, they need to save mass, what we found in both Medley 1 and Medley 2 is both the heat shield and back shell could go with some mass reduction on the TPS. So there's things like that right away that you could go ahead and go use if you need to. Certainly with the terrain relative navigation and range trigger, that on the parachute side, that all is going to be used. So some of the aerodynamics might make those be a little bit more efficient that we're finding in Medley 2. So there are some things that could apply to some of those as well. So thanks, Lacey. Appreciate it.
That's awesome. Thanks, Lacey. Thanks, Henry. Let's see, here's one from Mimi, and I don't know the question off the top of my head, so I'm hoping David or Carly or Henry remember. What's the temperature on Mars approximately?
I think the temperature on Mars is, let's see, on the very warmest day of summer near the equator, it might get to about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. But I think a typical Martian day where in Jezero crater just last week, I think was about 115 or so degrees below zero. So it gets really, really cold on Mars.
It sure does. One of the things that I recall from the Medley design was how cold we were really the first hardware that was ever bolted to the inside of the aeroshell, the heat shield. And if you think about it, that heat shield is pointed towards Mars during the 7th or 8th month cruise out there. And so we're always pointed away from the sun. So we got really cold in that vacuum of space, about minus 55 or more degrees C. And so we actually placed the electronics strategically to be under the nuclear power source so it would keep us toasty warm during the ride out there. And then, you know, we had to withstand that cold temperature during the time when we were just waiting and not turned on. And then when we got to Mars, we had to operate in that very high heating environment. So it was a very extreme case where we had really cold and really hot. Let's see, I've got one more comment here. For those from Christina, thank you, Christina. For those that worked on it, did you all know that there's a dress and a t-shirt out there with the parachute design? And she sent us the link. I actually had not seen that.
There is people have been doing a lot of fun things with the parachute and different kind of graphics, but I think we've talked about this in meetings now. A lot of the video and imagery has been made public, and so it's been really fun to see what the public has chosen to go do. I mean, a lot of the analysis we would do, they're doing themselves just because it sounds fun to them and they want to, and then they're putting it up on Reddit or anything. So it's been cool after the mission, the gift that keeps on giving, to see all the fun things people are doing with the cool things that we've got down from Perseverance. And I want the skirt. The skirt's cute.
All right, and I had one more question actually to Henry from the audience. Henry, did you build any messages into the heat shield?
Well, we did talk about it, but no, unfortunately, science dictated where our sensors went, and the rover wheels dictated where our harnesses could not go. So, so we couldn't even write in cursive with the harness. So, fortunately, no secret messages for us. Darn.
They might have been burned off anyway.
There you go.
All right, thank you very much. So I'm not seeing any more questions at the moment in the Q&A. Thank you to Elisa and Kristen for helping me moderate and keep track of everything. Give everybody a couple more seconds to think of any questions before we turn it back over to Mr. McKenna.
While we're waiting, if you wanted a couple other Mars technologies that have been commercialized, I know of a few.
Sure.
All right, so there are anthrax detectors. So these were designed as bacterial spore detection systems for Mars, and now they're protecting our airports and office buildings. There are advanced sensors for optical communication that have been developed. So these are photodetectors necessary for laser communication, like what might be used for Mars colonists in the future to be able to phone home. And so those are now being commercialized into next generation night vision goggles and other light sensing applications. So also Mars mapping technology for just is helping bring Main Street to life, is one of the ways we say it is. So it's geospatial views of cities, and so our everyday roads and alleys and freeways. They're now with the help of our 3D data generating software that was invented by NASA. They now have the 3D city maps that you see in some various applications. And maybe one last one that came to mind. And it's the tough textiles to protect public safety officers. So these are the multi-layer textiles. They were originally created for airbags, which is one of the ways we landed some of our earlier missions on Mars. And so those textiles are enabling the creation of new body armors. And so they're more comfortable than the traditional protective gear and are comparable to rigid steel plates and how they protect the individuals. So those are a few.
Awesome, Jeff, thank you. And we did have another question from Ms. Wade on how long does it take the samples to get back to Earth. And I actually typed the answer, but I'll just let everybody know. The sample retrieval lander, as David mentioned, is scheduled to launch in 2026. It would reach Mars in 2027. And then we would expect the samples to come back in about 2031 because there's some time on the surface to collect the samples. They get launched into orbit with a rocket. And then we actually have a partnership with the European Space Agency to provide the orbiter to pick up the sample cache or the sample container and bring it back to Earth. And the type of propulsion system that they use takes a little bit slower trip than we usually use to get out to Mars. So it would be a round trip of about 5 years. So thank you for that question. All right, well, I'd like to turn it back over to Mr. McKenna. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of our panelists and to all the attendees who interacted with us today. You had some very thought-provoking questions, and we really appreciate your interest and attendance.
Thank you very much, Michelle and panelists. That was, so I think awesome is a word that gets misused and overused in today's society, but that was truly awesome. And I have deep respect and admiration for what you all do. That was a fantastic way to begin the Spotlight on the Peninsula series once again. So we truly live, work, and play in a very cool community and a very cool region. Go Peninsula. So all of you people out there, please take this information and share it wide, and we will make this video of this presentation available to send out to all the people who registered for this event today, and to all the schools, including the schools on the south side and all surrounding areas. So I think this event is certainly worthy of sharing far and wide. So thanks again to all of our sponsors. Thanks to Cox and Hampton Economic Development Department and the Virginia Air and Space Science Center. And that's it for today. We hope that you all enjoyed this presentation and will join us in the future for further presentations with NASA and with Jefferson Lab and with several other great organizations in the Hampton Roads area. That's it. Thank you very much. Have a great week.